This video will explain a bit about exchange rates and how they're set in markets. First of all, it's important to think about what an exchange rate means. So these four questions: how much does a euro cost? How much does a yen cost? How much does a peso cost? How much does a dollar cost? The answer always has to be, well, in terms of what? Because we can only answer about a currency in terms of other currencies. How much does a euro cost in dollars or in yen? How much does a peso cost in dollars? How much does a dollar cost in euros? So currency values are not absolute. They are always relative, and they are always relative to another currency. The exchange rate is the price of one nation's currency in terms of another nation's currency. So how many US dollars does it take to buy a euro? Well, about $1.25 right now. When one currency rises in value, or what we call appreciates, then the other relative currency must, of necessity, depreciate. You'll notice that they are going to be reciprocals, the values of different currencies. So we're going to do an activity in class that explains exchange rates and how they're determined a little further, but this video is going to tell you a little about how to draw them. So first of all, when you're drawing exchange rate graphs, it's generally requested that you draw two graphs. So the one on the left here, because it says quantity of dollars on the x-axis, this is going to be the dollar market. And the one on the right is the euro market. So you're always tipped off about which market it is by which currency is in the subscript. So euros, euros here, dollars, dollars here. The y-axis is going to be price, in this case price of a dollar in terms of euros. And you could write it, instead of writing euro price of dollar like that, you can simply write euro and then euros slash dollars, euros per dollar, and over here dollars per euro. So you can imagine that those p's are gone and it's just dollars per euro or euros per dollar. So once you've established you have two graphs, you have them properly labeled, you're going to have pretty simple supply and demand graphs here. So I'm going to draw supply and demand, except once I've labeled them, which will take just a second here, actually I'm going to pause and label them. So you'll notice the graphs now have supply and demand on each graph, and I've eliminated those pesky p's. So this one says euros per dollar and this one says dollars per euro. And you can see we have these supply and demand lines, but I'm going to do something a little bit weird to these supply and demand lines, and that is I'm going to color code them. So this is supply in the dollar market, and I want you to think about who is supplying these dollars, right? Who has dollars to sell? And the answer is, of course, Americans, right? Americans are going to have dollars to sell with them. So we're going to change that to green to represent the dollars to sell. Okay, and who is going to be demanding these dollars in the euro to dollar market? Well, the demand is going to come from Europeans, presumably Europeans who want to have US dollars for some reason. So they might be Europeans who are planning to travel to the US, or they might be European firms that are importing US goods that they have to pay for in dollars. So we have the supply of dollars being offered for exchange by Americans and the demand, right? Demand for these dollars from Europeans. Let's go to the other market for a moment. Who's going to be supplying the euros in this market? Right? This is the supply of euros. Well, they're going to be supplied by Europeans, the very same people, right, who are demanding the dollars over here. So I'm going to color code this to represent the Europeans. These Europeans are supplying euros, right, because they want to buy dollars. Well, then who wants to buy the euros? Clearly, it's going to be Americans, right? They're supplying their dollars in this market because they want to buy euros. So you can see there's a pretty strong connection here between the, oops, not quite the same shade of green. We'll change that. There's a pretty strong connection here between these two markets. The suppliers in one market are the demanders in the other market. Over here we have Americans supplying, over here we have Americans demanding. Here we have Europeans supplying, here we have Europeans demanding. So some sort of triggering event happens. Let's say that Americans suddenly decide that they want to buy more cheese from Europe. There's a huge craving for Swiss cheese and French cheeses and other cheeses. So what's going to happen in this market? We have an existing equilibrium price and quantity on each graph. What's going to happen if there is a change in demand for one of the currencies? Let me add the equilibrium prices and quantities right now. Okay, you can see that I've added the labels Q1 on each of these graphs, and I've also labeled the current existing prices. So according to these graphs right now, it costs 80 euro cents to buy $1, and it costs $1.25 to buy €1. Now you should notice something about those two numbers, right? That there's a relationship, because 80 is 4/5 and $1.25 is 5/4. So we have a reciprocal relationship between the prices. So what's going to happen now if more Americans want euros? All right, first of all, you have to think, which graph do we want to go to? Well, if we want euros, we're going to go to the euro market, and the euro market is the one on the right here. So let's think about increased demand in the euro market. So I'm going to draw a new line representing demand, right, as a result of this shift, and we're going to put a little arrow, right, because we want to have our arrow each time, and we're going to call this D1. So put D1 up here, and oops, I'm going to make that a subscript. Okay, so what's going to happen? Well, now we have obviously a new price here, right? We have a new price in the euro market, and as a result of Americans wanting all of this cheese, right, we're going to have increased demand for euros, and the increased demand for euros is going to cause the price of a euro to increase. Clearly, we have a new price here. We're not really sure what it is yet. Maybe it's going to be $1.50, right? So we're going to label that. We'll make it $1.50 as a result of all of this increased demand. And we can see over here that we have increased quantity being exchanged as well. So we have higher price for euros, and we have more euros being bought and sold. So what about in the other market? We can't just leave things here, because we know if this price goes up to $1.50, we know this price has to go down. They are reciprocals. This was 4/5, this was 5/4. Now we have 6/4, so we can pretty well bet this is going to go down to 4/6, or about, what, 67 cents, right? We know we're going to have a new price of 67 cents, but why? What's going to happen in this market? So I'm going to go ahead and just write that price so we know that's where we're aiming. So you already know enough about supply and demand to know it's one of two things: either demand decreased or supply increased, right? Those are the two ways we can get a lower price. We can have demand decrease, or we can have supply increase. Well, let's think about this. This line here is the demand, right, from Americans wanting euros. And they are wanting more euros, right? They are bringing more of their dollars to market in order to buy those euros. So if this green line for demand is shifting to the right, this green line of supply also has to shift to the right. Okay, in order to buy those euros, the Americans have to be willing to bring their dollars with them to the market. So if the demand is shifting to the right in the euro market, the supply must be shifting to the right in the euro market. And that works because it will bring us to this lower price that we know now there must be a lower price for the dollar. So, oops, I didn't exactly mean to do that. Anytime you have, to draw a new line here, anytime you have a change in one of the markets, you're going to have a change in the other market. And the way it's going to work is that there will always be a shift in demand in one market and a shift in supply in the other. So if you can think to yourself or color code them for yourself as you're doing the problems and realize which two lines correspond, that's going to make these graphs a lot easier to do. There are a number of things that can cause these shifts, a number of things that can cause appreciation or depreciation, and there's a little list here. So demand for a nation's goods and services like the cheese, or demand for tourism, the supply of currency, for example, if there's just more currency available in a particular country. If there's more dollar bills floating around, there will probably be more dollars supplied in exchange for euros or yen or pesos. Inflation. So inflation is the loss of a currency's value within the country. Depreciation is the currency's loss of value internationally. So if a currency is losing value domestically, if it's become inflated, then people who live in the country are probably losing faith in it. They're thinking, oh, this isn't worth what it used to be, and they may seek out harder currencies or stronger currencies. And by the very act of doing so, so let's say in Brazil, their currency is losing value and Brazilians decide to buy more dollars so they can store their earnings in dollars, they will cause the Brazilian currency to fall in value, right? Because they'll be supplying more of their currency in the exchange market. Interest rates, we'll talk much more about this later, but interest rates can also be a factor because people who have money and want to put it in banks or buy financial instruments that will give them a higher rate of return will buy those things or put their money in banks in countries with higher interest rates. So for example, if an American sees that there's a higher interest rate offered at a bank in London, they would have to transfer their dollars into British pounds before they could take advantage of that higher interest rate. So a higher interest rate in London relative to a US bank would cause an increased demand for pounds. And finally, political unrest. People generally do not want to buy currencies from countries that are not seen as stable. So when there's political unrest, people who have money will tend to increase their supply in the exchange market and go in search of more stable currencies.